These are some verses from the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Last week or the week before, I came home from work quite late one night, and it was after dark when I went out to the pasture to check on the sheep. I knew they had adequate hay and water, but after the difficulties that we've had with sheep polio on our farm, I like to walk among the flock every night to make sure that no one sheep has keeled over on its side and is unable to get up. I'm not sure what time I went out, but it must have been fairly late because I found that many of the sheep in the pasture had already bedded down for the night and were lying scattered about with their feet tucked under them, chewing their cud. No one was calling to me, so I knew that they were not hungry and they weren't thirsty and they weren't too hot. And the amazing thing was that they did not get up when I approached. A few of them did, and came near me to see whether I might have some treat to give them or just because they wanted to put a nose on my leg. But most of them continued to lie down and chew their cud, or if they were eating, continued to eat. Not one of them was frightened. Not one of them ran away. And this simple interaction filled me with great joy. It meant to me that I had become a shepherd whom my sheep could trust. And I don't know whether I have ever before received such a positive evaluation of my character. People have a tendency to believe that sheep are stupid. And you might think so too, knowing what they think of my character. But people have a tendency to believe that sheep are stupid, but what sheep really are is unprotected. Unlike cattle and horses, llamas and wildebeest, dogs and even goats, they are mostly defenseless. They have neither hooves nor claws nor fangs with which to defend themselves. Their horns are often not useful except in fighting against other sheep. What they do have is thick plates and whatever protection wool can offer. So they stick together because there is safety in numbers, but they are often skittish, running this way and that to escape a blowing feed bag or the noise of a truck backing up or the male person walking up the driveway. Any unknown thing is both an object of great curiosity and a potential threat. We can laugh at sheep, but in truth, we have a great deal more in common with them than we might like to think. Except that our situation is actually somewhat worse than the situation of a sheep. With the exception of rams, especially during mating season, the one thing a sheep does not have to fear is another sheep. But the harms that come to human beings are frequently inflicted by human beings, and we do not immediately know whom to trust among human beings at any rate. There are all kinds of harm that human beings inflict on one another, but let's just set aside for the moment acts of physical violence, war and warriors, psychopaths and sociopaths, con men, and those who cheat at games. Most likely, the human beings who have hurt us or damaged us or obstructed our well-being have done so by measuring us unfairly or inaccurately, by slapping a grade or a score on us that does not reflect who we really are. They've withheld from us something that we wanted or needed. They've made it clear that we have no value to them. They've lied to us. They've used one of our talents or something that we possess for their own ends without any reciprocity. Both sheep and human beings need to make judgments about who and what can be trusted. And in addition, if we are serious about following the example of Jesus, we ourselves have to figure out how to become worthy of trust. When I began to think about what it meant that my sheep trust me, and in parallel fashion, what it means for any of us to be trustable, I found a lot of definitions of trustworthy that spoke about keeping your word and fulfilling your promises and not gossiping about others. But trust among sheep doesn't really have much to do with words. It is something more fundamental than promise keeping. And the very most fundamental description of trust that I found was in a book by Rowan Williams called Tokens of Trust, in which he explains that the very basis of faith is the realization that above all, above anything else, God is worthy of our trust. This is a very small book, less than 100 pages, but it is a mighty book. And I cannot do justice to the way in which he interweaves the ideas of creation and trust. So I've tried to put together some quotations from that book in a way that makes sense. And I've woven them together. I'm going to read them for a while. Everything that I say is a quotation from Rowan Williams until I say that it isn't. Christian belief is really about knowing who and what to trust, he writes. In John's Gospel, the 9th chapter, Jesus asks the blind man he's just cured whether he believes in the Son of Man. He's certainly not asking, as he might ask about the Loch Ness Monster, whether the man is of the opinion that the Son of Man exists. He wants to know whether the former blind man is ready to trust the Son of Man, that is, Jesus in his role as representative of the human race before God. Naturally, the man wants to know who the Son of Man is, and Jesus says that it is him. The man responds with the words, I believe. He believes, he has confidence. That is, he doesn't go off wondering whether the Son of Man is out to further his own ends and deceive him. He trusts Jesus to be working for him, not for any selfish goals, and he believes that what he sees and hears when Jesus is around is the truth. The Bible gives us various answers to the question of why we should trust the maker of heaven and earth and not regard him as an unfathomable alien intelligence. Especially from the evidence of Jesus, we know that this and this alone is God's agenda. The world he has made is designed to become a reconciled world, a world in which diverse human communities come to share a life together because they share the conviction that God has acted to set them free from fear and guilt. And this in turn is only one facet of a reconciliation that somehow affects the whole cosmos, that draws the diversity of the created world itself together so that it works harmoniously. This reconciliation liberates human voices for praise, for celebrating the glory of the God who has made it possible and has held steadily to his purpose from the beginning. This is what God is after, and there is no hidden agenda. Nothing is kept back. We know what God's aim in creation is, and it is an aim directed entirely towards the benefit of ourselves and the rest of creation. It is in no way a selfish purpose. God has no reason for deceiving us. If the purpose has been hidden, it is not because God has arbitrarily decided to keep us in the dark. The revelation has to wait until the time is ripe, until the perfect vehicle of communication has appeared. At the heart of the desperate suffering there is in the world, suffering we can do nothing to resolve or remove for good, there is yet an indestructible energy making for love. If we have grasped what Jesus is about, we can trust that this is what lies at the foundation of everything. We can trust the maker of heaven and earth precisely because he is the maker of heaven and earth. God is the unique source of everything. Therefore, there is nothing God is forced to do. There is nothing alongside God, nothing by nature extra to God or beyond God. God is never one thing among others. So there can be no question of God having to do anything at all that he doesn't want to do. And because he cannot need anything, because he contains all reality eternally and by nature, the only thing that can motivate his action is simply what he is, the kind of God he is. What he does shows us what he is. Put slightly differently, this means that God can't have a selfish agenda because he can't want anything for himself except to be the way he is. So if the world exists because of God's action, the only motivation for this that we can even begin to think of is sheer unselfish love. He wants to give what he is to what isn't him. He wants difference to appear. He wants an other to receive his joy and delight. He isn't bored and in need of company. He isn't frustrated and in need of help. Thus, we have to bend our minds around the admittedly tough notion that we exist because of an utterly unconditional generosity. The love that God shows in making the world, like the love he shows toward the world once it is created, has no shadow or shred of self-directed purpose in it. It is entirely and unreservedly given for our sake. It is not a concealed way for God to get something out of it for himself, because that would make nonsense of what we believe is God's nature. God is, in simple terms, sublimely and eternally happy to be God. And the fact that this sublime eternal happiness overflows into the act of creation is itself a way of telling us that God is to be trusted absolutely, that God has no private agenda. God is to be trusted as we would trust a loving parent whose commitment to us is inexhaustible, whose purposes for us are unfailingly generous, someone whose life is the source of our life, and who guarantees that there is always a home for us. I want to read that final paragraph one time with a slight alteration. God is to be trusted as we would trust a good shepherd, whose commitment to us is inexhaustible, whose purposes for us are unfailingly generous, someone whose life is the source of our life, and who guarantees that there is always a home for us. If we are meant to follow in the way of Jesus, the Good Shepherd, then what does it mean for us to be trustworthy, to participate in God's work in the world by becoming trustworthy as God is trustworthy? It would mean that all of our relationships to others cannot be about furthering our own ends, cannot be deceptive or manipulative, that we would always be for the highest good of our friend or child or colleague or spouse, that all of our purposes in relationship would be unfailingly generous. And this is one of the many, many ways in which we are not like God. As human beings, our relationships can never be entirely free of utilitarian concerns. We need help. Our lives depend on the assistance of others. At our very best, we are interdependent. Maybe we need our father to help us change a tire. an accountant to help us with our taxes, our colleague whose job it is to print off the mailing labels for the fundraiser. At least in my household, somebody else grows the vegetables that we eat at dinner. A scientist far, far away creates the vaccine for this year's flu variety. Unlike God, we are not beings who do not need anything beyond the boundaries of our autonomous self. Yet we can still craft for ourselves a definition of trustworthy that sheep would be able to recognize. When we do need something from another, we can seek to gain it without compulsion or force. We can ask for help kindly rather than demanding it. We can be grateful always and express thanks for the cooperation that we are offered. We can be truthful always. We can make sure that the needs that we have, any agenda we have, any aim of using someone for our benefit is not hidden. And especially what we need from someone else should not be oppositional. Our good must not depend on their harm. This is absolutely key. What we need from someone else should result in good for us both. In other words, when I go through the checkout line at the grocery store, my relationship with the cashier is almost entirely utilitarian. I need her cooperation to be able to put food on my table. But it must be good for us both. I should be concerned about whether her wages are fair, whether she earns the money she needs to put food on her table. What we need from someone else should not be oppositional, and our good must not depend on their harm. There's a reason why the Bible refers so often to sheep and to shepherds. It is because sheep who trust their shepherd are displaying one of the most profound displays of trust that we can witness, as complete as that of an infant's trust of its mother, and yet they have more awareness of the dangers that the world poses. This is why God is the shepherd in the 23rd Psalm. And Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd in the 10th chapter of John. Because in a world which often defeats our trust, God, and God as we know, God through Jesus, have been found to be completely trustworthy. And so as disciples of Christ, as lovers of God, we also desire to be worthy of trust. Remember that in Isaiah's portrait of the kingdom of God, sheep will not be afraid. The lion will lie down with the lamb. And I'm not speaking entirely of bovine sheep, but also of the sheep that we are as human beings. In the kingdom of God, we will not be afraid. Our work to become worthy of trust is part of what brings that kingdom of God into being.